After a romantic affair with her billionaire boss, he ghosted. But that night, she got drunk and confronted him with her feelings. Hey family, welcome back to your one and only Dr. Tom's Love Tales, your home to relax and enjoy the most touching love stories that will warm your heart and remind you that true love never dies. I'm your host, Dr. Tom, and before we begin the story, kindly let us know where you're watching from today. If you're just joining us for the first time, quickly hit that subscribe button. Also, if you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. Now, let's dive in. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune on the 40th floor of Kane Industries, casting a cold blue glow across rows of empty cubicles. Seattle's skyline twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city alive with Thursday night energy, while the corporate world slept. But Ava Mendez wasn't sleeping. She sat hunched over her laptop, dark hair falling like a curtain around her face, shielding her from the world that had become increasingly difficult to navigate. Her empty coffee cup bore the stains of her third espresso, and beside it sat a half-empty bottle of Trader Joe's wine, her Thursday night companion for dealing with impossible deadlines and even more impossible feelings. At 28, Ava had always been the responsible one, the daughter who sent money home to her parents in Phoenix every month without fail. The friend who remembered birthdays and answered late-night crisis calls. The employee who stayed until the work was perfect, even when perfection felt like chasing smoke. But tonight, responsibility felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, whether from caffeine or nerves, she couldn't tell anymore. 3 months. 3 months since that company retreat in the San Juan Islands. 3 months since everything changed in the span of one incredible, terrifying night. 3 months of carrying a secret that grew heavier with each passing day, each stolen glance across conference rooms, each carefully neutral, "Good morning, Mr. Kane," that tasted like ash in her mouth. The retreat had been mandatory for all senior staff, a weekend of team-building exercises and corporate bonding at a luxury resort overlooking the Puget Sound. Ava had gone reluctantly, nursing a migraine and dreading 2 days of forced interaction with colleagues who barely acknowledged her existence outside of project deadlines. She never expected to find herself alone with Elijah Kane during a sudden rainstorm that knocked out the resort's power. The billionaire CEO who'd built Kane Industries from nothing, transforming a small software startup into a tech empire that employed thousands. The man whose face graced magazine covers with headlines like "The Ice King of Seattle Tech," and whose business decisions moved markets before lunch. The untouchable golden boy, who was rumored to have never taken a vacation, never missed a board meeting, never let anyone see him as anything other than perfectly, ruthlessly controlled. But that night, when emergency lighting cast strange shadows in the resort's library, Elijah hadn't seemed untouchable at all. He'd seemed human, vulnerable, real. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing, about his recurring nightmares of losing everything like his father had, about her imposter syndrome that whispered she didn't belong in boardrooms or corner offices, about the loneliness that came with being surrounded by people who only saw what they wanted to see. And then, somehow, talking had turned into touching. Gentle at first, hesitant, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear like morning mist. But the hesitation had melted away, replaced by a hunger that surprised them both. They'd made love with a desperate intensity, as if they were trying to pour 3 months of unspoken longing into a single night. Ava could still remember the way Elijah had whispered her name against her skin, like a prayer or a confession. The way he'd held her afterward, his walls completely down, sharing stories about finding his father's suicide note that she was certain he'd never told another soul. But morning had come, as mornings always do, and with it, reality. The moment Ava had woken up in Elijah's arms, panic had set in like ice water in her veins. What had she done? How could she face him at work? How could she pretend this hadn't happened when it felt like the most real thing that had ever occurred in her carefully controlled life? So she'd run, slipped out while he was still sleeping, left a note that said nothing important, and spent the flight back to Seattle convincing herself it had been a mistake. A beautiful, perfect, life-altering mistake that could never happen again. That had been the plan, anyway. Since then, they'd maintained a professional distance that felt like slow torture. Elijah treated her with the same cool politeness he showed every other mid-level employee, brief nods in hallways, clipped responses during the rare meetings where their paths crossed. Not a single acknowledgement that anything had changed between them. But Ava felt the change in every fiber of her being. She noticed things about him now that she'd never seen before. The way he ran his fingers through his hair when he was frustrated, exactly like he had that night when she'd asked about his fears. The slight softening around his eyes when he thought no one was looking. The fact that he seemed to know exactly where she was in every room they shared, even when he never looked directly at her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend. "Call me when you get home. Need details about Jake's situation. Also, eat something that isn't coffee." Camille Rodriguez, her college roommate, her voice of reason, the one person who could read her like an open book. If anyone would understand the impossible situation she'd found herself in, it would be Cam. But how could she explain that she'd fallen for a man who could buy and sell her entire existence without checking his bank balance? How could she admit that she spent her lunch breaks Googling "billionaire dating normal person," like some kind of masochist? Tonight, alone in the empty office, with nothing but her thoughts and the weight of unspoken words, Ava finally reached her breaking point. The wine had loosened something inside her chest, making the secret feel too big to contain anymore. She needed to tell someone. She needed to voice the feelings that were eating her alive from the inside out. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, almost without her permission, opening Gmail and muscle memory, guiding her to her frequent contacts. The wine made her movements slightly clumsy, but her heart was perfectly clear about what she needed to say. The cursor blinked expectantly in the subject line. Ava typed, "I'm losing my mind." Then she began to write, her fingers flying across the keys as 3 months of pent-up emotion poured out. "Cam, I swear it was just one night. I thought I could handle it. But every time I see him walk past my cube, I lose my train of thought. I replay it all the way. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. How he touched me like I was something precious. How for 3 hours, Elijah Kane was just. And now he's ice again, like nothing happened. Like I dreamed those 3 hours when the untouchable CEO let me see his scars. I hate that I want him. I hate that I wonder if he ever thinks about it too. If he ever replays the way I said his name in the dark. I hate that I check my reflection every morning hoping today will be the day he actually sees me again instead of looking through me like I'm glass. God, Cam, I think I'm falling in love with him. And that's the most terrifying thing of all. What did I do? Ava." She read through the email once, her hand hovering over the mouse. This was it. Once she sent this, someone else would know her secret. The burden wouldn't be hers alone anymore. She clicked send. For exactly 3 seconds, Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, she'd voiced the truth that had been consuming her. Finally, someone would understand the impossible situation she'd found herself in. And then her blood turned to ice. The sent confirmation flashed across her screen, and there, in cruel black letters that seemed to pulse with her racing heartbeat, was the recipient line, "Elijah, Kane at kaneindustries.com. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty office. Her hands shook violently as she stared at the screen, willing the words to change for this to be some kind of wine-induced hallucination. But it wasn't. In her exhaustion and emotional turmoil and wine-hazed desperation, muscle memory had betrayed her. She'd clicked on Elijah's name from her recent contacts instead of Camille's. 3 months of careful professional distance, of pretending that night had never happened, and she just confessed everything to the one person who held her career and her heart in his hands. Unsend, unsend, please have an unsend button, she muttered frantically, clicking through Gmail's interface like her life depended on it. But of course there was no taking it back. The email was delivered, probably already read, certainly already destroying any hope she had of maintaining her professional dignity. Her phone buzzed against the desk, the sound sharp enough to make her jump. A text message from an internal number she knew by heart, though she'd never saved it in her contacts. The message was brief, direct, and terrifying in its simplicity. My office. Now, EK. Ava's legs felt unsteady as she stood from her desk, the wine and adrenaline making the world tilt slightly. She'd just sent her deepest, most vulnerable thoughts to the most powerful man in the building. To her boss's boss's boss, to the man who could fire her with a single word and destroy her career with a casual conversation. The walk to the elevator felt endless, her heels clicking against the polished floors like a countdown to disaster. Each step echoed in the empty corridors, a staccato rhythm that matched her racing pulse. The building was nearly empty at this hour, just a few security guards and cleaning crew members who nodded politely as she passed. They had no idea she was walking toward what might be the end of everything she'd worked for. The elevator doors slid closed with a soft chime, and Ava found herself staring at her reflection in the polished steel. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman on the verge of a complete breakdown. Her usually neat ponytail was coming loose, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes, and her white blouse was wrinkled from hours of hunching over her laptop. She could smell the wine on her breath and prayed Elijah wouldn't notice. 52 floors. 52 floors to figure out what she was going to say to the man who now knew her most carefully guarded secret. 52 floors to prepare for professional annihilation. The executive floor was a study in understated power, thick carpeting that muffled footsteps, artwork that probably cost more than her annual salary, offices with doors that stayed closed, and conversations that shaped the future of thousands of employees. Even the air felt different up here, rarefied, expensive, designed to remind visitors of their place in the corporate hierarchy. Elijah's corner office sat at the end of the hallway, its double doors standing slightly ajar. Light spilled out into the corridor, and Ava could see his silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Elliott Bay. Even in shadow, his posture radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. She knocked softly, her knuckles barely making contact with the heavy wood. "Come in." His voice was exactly as she remembered from that night, deep, controlled, but with an underlying warmth that few people ever heard. Tonight, though, there was something else. An edge that made her stomach clench with anxiety, and something that might have been anticipation. Ava stepped into the office and immediately felt dwarfed by its scale. This was Elijah's domain, a space designed to intimidate and impress. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her car. Awards and accolades that chronicled his rise from college dropout to one of the youngest billionaires in tech. Everything carefully chosen to project an image of absolute control. He stood with his back to her, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Even at nearly midnight, his charcoal suit was perfectly pressed, his dark hair immaculately styled. Everything about Elijah Kane screamed power and control except for the slight tension in his shoulders that Ava recognized from that night when his carefully constructed walls had crumbled. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Ava obeyed, the soft click of the latch feeling like a death sentence. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of her inadvertent confession. She could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the faint scent of his cologne that had haunted her dreams for 3 months. "Mr. Kane, she began, but he cut her off with a slight movement of his hand. 3 months, he said, finally turning to face her. His steel-gray eyes were exactly as she remembered, intelligent, penetrating, capable of seeing straight through to the heart of any problem. But tonight, there was something burning beneath their surface, something that made her breath catch in her throat and her pulse skip erratically. 3 months of pretending that night didn't happen, he continued, moving away from the window with predatory grace. 3 months of you avoiding eye contact in meetings. 3 months of me wondering if you regretted it so much that you couldn't bear to look at me. Up close, Ava could see the subtle signs of strain around his eyes, the slight tightness in his jaw that suggested he was holding himself under rigid control. The untouchable CEO facade was perfect, but she'd seen behind it once. She knew the man underneath, the one who'd whispered about his father's death and held her like she was the only solid thing in his world. She started again, but found herself at a loss for words. What could she possibly say? How could she explain 3 months of professional distance when her email had just revealed the truth of her feelings? And now this, Elijah said, gesturing toward his computer screen where her email was still open, her words glowing accusingly in the blue light. You think you're falling in love with me. You wonder if I think about it too. He stepped closer, and Ava caught the faint scent of his cologne cedar and something uniquely him that made her head spin with memories of tangled sheets and whispered confessions. The memory hit her like a physical blow, threatening to destroy what little composure she had left. Well, Ms. Mendez, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, since you asked, yes, I think about it every damn day. The confession hung in the air between them, electric and dangerous. Ava felt her heart stop, then restart at double time. He thought about it, about her, about that night. But before she could process what that meant, Elijah's expression shifted back to something harder, more controlled. The question is, he continued, his voice carefully modulated, what exactly do you want me to do with that information? I don't understand, Ava managed to say, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Don't you? Elijah's smile was sharp enough to cut. You've just confessed that you're falling in love with your CEO. You've told me you replay our night together. You've admitted you want me to see you, really see you, instead of treating you like just another employee. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to count the barely perceptible stubble along his jaw. So I'm asking, Ava, what do you want? Do you want me to pretend I never read that email? Do you want me to transfer you to another department? Or do you want me to tell you that I've been thinking about you every day since that night, that I know exactly where you are in every meeting we share, that I've been going slowly insane trying to maintain professional distance when all I want is to finish what we started? The words hit her like lightning, raw and charged with 3 months of suppressed longing. Was he threatening her, warning her, or challenging her to make a choice she wasn't sure she was brave enough to make? Ava's voice cracked and she had to swallow hard before continuing. I want you to tell me that I didn't imagine what happened between us, that it meant something to you too. Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a crack in the armor that let her glimpse the vulnerable man underneath. It meant everything, he said softly, the admission seeming to surprise them both, and that's exactly why this is so dangerous. Before she could respond, before she could process the full weight of his confession, Elijah stepped back and moved to his desk, settling behind it like a barrier between them. You can go, he said, not looking up from his computer screen. And Ms. Mendez, this conversation never happened. But as Ava left his office on unsteady legs, she realized that everything had changed. The careful professional distance they'd maintained was now impossible. The secret was out, the words spoken, the truth acknowledged. For better or worse, there was no going back. My family, before we continue, I noticed a lot of my viewers leave our story without subscribing, and honestly, I put a lot of efforts in creating these heartfelt stories. Please encourage me by quickly hitting that subscribe button right now, and share this story if you're already enjoying it. Now, let's continue. 2 weeks passed in a blur of carefully maintained professional distance and sleepless nights, filled with replaying every word of their midnight conversation. Ava threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, partly to distract herself from the impossible situation she'd created, and partly because she suspected Elijah was watching her performance more closely now. She arrived early, stayed late, and produced analysis reports that were more thorough and insightful than anything she'd ever created. If she was going to be fired for her moment of wine-induced weakness, at least she'd go out proving her professional worth. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts from Camille, who'd grown increasingly worried about Ava's vague responses and obvious stress. "You're being weird. Spill. I'm staging an intervention if you don't call me back. I'm buying a plane ticket to Seattle. You have 24 hours to explain." But how could Ava explain that she'd accidentally confessed her feelings to her billionaire CEO, who'd responded by admitting he thought about her every day before essentially telling her to pretend it never happened? It sounded like the plot of a romance novel even to her, which made the email that appeared in her inbox on a rainy Tuesday morning all the more shocking. Ava had been reviewing quarterly projections, her third cup of coffee growing cold beside her laptop when the notification chimed. The sender made her stomach immediately clench with anxiety. Kane Industries Human Resources. This was it, the professional consequences she'd been dreading for 2 weeks. But as she read the email, her confusion only deepened. "Dear Ms. Mendez, congratulations. Following a comprehensive review of your professional accomplishments and potential for growth within Kane Industries, you have been selected for promotion to Senior Data Analytics Manager, reporting directly to the Chief Technology Officer. This position comes with a 40% salary increase, expanded benefits package, and leadership responsibilities for a team of 6 junior analysts. Your first day in this new role will be Monday, March 15th. Please report to HR by Friday to complete the necessary paperwork. Best regards, Jennifer Walsh, Director of Human Resources." Ava read the email 3 times, certain she was hallucinating. Senior Data Analytics Manager was 3 levels above her current position. It was the kind of promotion that typically took years to achieve, not weeks, and she hadn't even applied for the position. Holy shit, Ava. She looked up to find Jamie Reyes, one of her few friends in the office, peering over her shoulder with wide eyes. "Senior manager? That's like jumping 3 levels at once. How did you manage that?" "I have no idea," Ava said honestly, still staring at the email in disbelief. "I didn't even know this position existed." "Well, someone upstairs thinks you're hot stuff," Jamie said, settling into the chair beside Ava's desk. Her expression grew more serious, and she lowered her voice. "Word around the water cooler is that the recommendation came from the executive level, like top-tier executive level." The words hit Ava like a punch to the gut. Executive level. There was only one executive who even knew she existed, and he'd made it very clear that their midnight conversation had never happened. But this felt like proof that it had happened, that her accidental confession had consequences she never could have anticipated. "Ava," Jamie continued, her voice taking on a warning tone, "people are talking about how quickly you've advanced, about who might be responsible for your rapid ascent." The euphemism hit like ice water. "What kind of talking?" Jamie glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "The kind that suggests your promotion might have been influenced by factors beyond your professional qualifications. Derek Morrison has been particularly vocal about it." Derek Morrison, the Harvard MBA who'd applied for several senior positions and been passed over each time. Ava had caught him making snide comments about diversity hires and lowered standards whenever women or minorities received promotions. "What exactly is Derek saying?" Ava asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Nothing specific, just implications about sleeping your way to success." about certain executives having personal reasons for advancing certain employees. The crude suggestion made Ava's cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. Every achievement she'd worked for, every late night and weekend spent perfecting her analysis, every innovative insight she'd brought to her projects, all of it reduced to ugly speculation about her personal life. "Earth to Ava," Jamie said, waving a hand in front of her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost. This is good news, right?" "Yes," Ava said automatically. "Yes, of course, it's good news." But as Jamie wandered back to her own desk, chattering excitedly about celebration drinks, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this promotion was anything but simple good fortune. That afternoon, she found herself doing something she'd sworn she wouldn't, dodging into the circumstances surrounding her advancement. A few discreet conversations with contacts in HR revealed that the senior manager position had been created specifically for her. The job description matched her skills perfectly, almost as if it had been written with her qualifications in mind. More disturbing was the discovery that the recommendation had indeed come from the executive level, through channels so high up the corporate ladder that most employees would never even know they existed. Elijah Kane's fingerprints were all over this promotion, as invisible and undeniable as morning mist. But why? Was this his way of silencing her, buying her compliance with career advancement? Or was it something else, entirely something that had to do with the raw honesty she'd heard in his voice when he'd admitted to thinking about her every day? By 5 o'clock, Ava had made a decision that probably qualified as career suicide. She was going to confront him. The executive floor was busier during normal business hours, with assistants and junior executives moving through the hallways with the purposeful energy of people whose time was measured in millions of dollars. Ava felt out of place in her simple black dress and modest heels, but she forced herself to walk with confidence toward Elijah's office. His assistant, a perfectly polished woman in her 40s named Margaret, looked up as Ava approached. "I need to speak with Mr. Kane," Ava said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent, about the senior manager promotion." Margaret's expression shifted slightly, suggesting this wasn't the first conversation she'd had about Ava's advancement. "I'll see if he's available." After a brief phone conversation conducted in hushed tones, Margaret nodded toward the office doors. "He'll see you now." Elijah looked up from his laptop as she entered, his expression shifting from mild interest to something more guarded when he recognized her. Today he wore a navy suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds, and his dark hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. "Ms. Mendez, congratulations on your promotion." "Did you do this?" Ava asked directly, closing the door behind her and abandoning any pretense of small talk. "Do what?" His voice was perfectly neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes that she'd learned to recognize as one of his tells. "The promotion, the sudden career advancement that makes no sense based on my tenure or performance reviews." Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Are you suggesting you don't deserve the position?" "I'm suggesting," Ava said, stepping closer to his desk and drawing strength from her anger, "that this feels like you're either punishing me or protecting me, and I need to know which one it is." For a moment, something flickered across Elijah's face, of surprise, maybe, or admiration for her directness. "Why would I be punishing you?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Because I sent you that email. Because I broke the unspoken rule about pretending that night didn't happen. Because I forced you to acknowledge feelings you'd rather keep buried. And why would I be protecting you?" Ava hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. After all, he already knew her deepest secrets. "Because maybe you meant what you said, about thinking about me every day, about that night meaning everything to you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths, and the weight of possibilities neither was quite brave enough to voice. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the private drama unfolding 52 floors above the street. Finally, Elijah stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that spoke of practiced control. The position opened up unexpectedly, he said without turning around, his voice carefully modulated. Your analytics work on the Richardson account was exceptional. Your insights saved the company nearly $2 million in projected losses. But, Ava started. Your promotion was recommended by the CTO based on merit. Elijah continued smoothly. I simply didn't object to it. Ava studied his profile against the Seattle skyline, noting the familiar tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled posture that she'd come to recognize as his defensive stance. 3 months of watching him from afar had taught her to read the subtle signs he thought no one noticed. You're lying, she said quietly. Elijah turned sharply, his gray eyes flashing with something between surprise and indignation. Excuse me? You're lying, Ava repeated, surprising herself with her boldness. I've seen your tells, Elijah. That night, when you told me about your father's suicide note, about why you really started this company, you got that same look when you were trying not to let me see how much it still hurt. The memory hit both of them simultaneous. That moment in the resort library when rain had drummed against the windows and Elijah had shared the story of finding his father's body, the note that blamed himself for the business failure. It was the moment his walls had first cracked, revealing the wounded boy beneath the billionaire facade. The use of his first name hung in the air like a challenge, a deliberate crossing of the professional boundaries they'd been so careful to maintain. Elijah's face went through a series of micro-expressions before settling into something dangerously calm. You think you know me, Ms. Mendez? His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. I think, Ava said, her heart pounding but her voice growing steadier with each word, that you're a man who spent so long controlling everything around him that you don't know how to handle something you can't control, like feelings, like that night, like me. Elijah moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The familiar scent of his colonosceder and something uniquely him made her head spin with memories of tangled sheets and whispered confessions in the dark. And what exactly do you think I can't control about you? The question was loaded with challenge and barely restrained hunger. Ava felt her breath catch as memories flooded back the way he'd touched her, like she was something precious and rare. The vulnerability in his voice when he'd whispered her name in the darkness. The desperate way he'd held her as if she might disappear. But she also remembered the morning after, the careful way he'd rebuilt his walls while she'd gathered her scattered clothes and shattered assumptions about her place in his world. This, she whispered, gesturing between them with a trembling hand, whatever this is between us. You can manipulate my career, move me around like a chess piece, engineer my success or failure with a word, but you can't make me stop wanting you, and you can't make yourself stop wanting me back. For a moment that felt like eternity, they stood frozen in that space between professional courtesy and personal truth. Elijah's hand rose as if to touch her face, his fingers stopping just inches from her skin. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the battle between his need for control and his desire for something real, something that couldn't be bought or commanded or contained in a corporate structure. You don't know what you're asking for, he said, but his voice lacked the conviction of his usual pronouncements. Don't I? Ava stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to count his heartbeats if she dared. That night, for 3 hours, you weren't the untouchable CEO. You were just Elijah. You told me about your nightmares, about waking up convinced you'd lost everything like your father did. You were human, and I think that terrifies you more than any hostile takeover or board meeting ever could. She watched him struggle with the truth of her words, saw the moment when his carefully constructed defenses wavered. For just an instant, She glimpsed the man she'd held in her arms, vulnerable, desperate for connection, achingly real beneath all the armor. But then the wall slammed back into place with almost audible force. "Your new position starts Monday," he said coldly, stepping back and putting the safety of distance between them. "I suggest you focus on that instead of whatever fantasy you've constructed about us." The dismissal was brutal in its finality, designed to cut and wound. But as Ava left his office for the second time in as many weeks, she realized something important. Elijah Kane might be a master manipulator in the boardroom, but when it came to his own emotions, he was just as lost and frightened as she was. And that gave her hope. 1 month later, Ava had learned that working 3 floors below your secret lover was like trying to concentrate during an earthquake, technically possible, but guaranteed to leave you shaken and disoriented. Her new position as Senior Data Analytics Manager had come with everything she'd dreamed of: a glass-walled office with a view of the harbor, a team of 6 brilliant junior analysts who looked to her for guidance, and access to executive-level meetings that challenged her intellectually in ways she'd never experienced. It had also come with the constant possibility of running into Elijah in hallways, elevators, and conference rooms encounters that left her pulse racing and her thoughts scattered for hours afterward. The professional distance they maintained during these meetings was excruciating. He treated her with the same cool efficiency he showed everyone else, never letting his gaze linger, never acknowledging the electricity that crackled between them whenever they shared the same space. But Ava noticed things. The way he positioned himself across the conference table from her during strategy meetings, as if he needed the barrier of polished wood between them. How he always seemed to know which projects her team was working on, despite having no direct oversight of her department. The fact that her team consistently received the most interesting and high-profile assignments, with timelines that were generous and resources that were abundant. "Ava, you're distracted again," observed David Kim, one of her senior analysts, during their weekly team meeting. "Everything okay?" Ava blinked, realizing she'd been staring out her office window toward the executive floors above, wondering what Elijah was doing at that exact moment. The antacid she'd chewed before the meeting left a chalky taste in her mouth, her new daily ritual for managing the stress of loving someone she couldn't have. "Sorry, just thinking about the Morrison project timeline," she said, forcing herself to refocus on the presentation displayed on her wall monitor. "The Morrison project that you've already optimized to perfection?" asked Lisa Park, her newest hire and arguably the most talented data scientist Ava had ever worked with. "Ava, I've never seen modeling that clean. Whatever methodology you're using, we should document it for the rest of the company." The praise should have made her feel proud. Instead, it made her stomach twist with doubt. Was her work actually exceptional? Or was Elijah somehow ensuring she received the best projects, the most resources, the clearest path to success? That evening, after her team had gone home to their families and normal lives, Ava stayed behind to investigate. She pulled up project allocation records, resource distribution reports, and timeline comparisons with other departments. What she found made her blood run cold. Every major project her team had worked on in the past month had been specifically requested for her department by someone in executive management. Every deadline had been reasonable, every resource allocation generous. Client preferences had been mysteriously aligned with her team's particular strengths. It was subtle, masterfully done, but unmistakably managed from above. Elijah wasn't just protecting her career, he was engineering her entire professional trajectory. Her phone buzzed against her desk, the sound sharp in the empty office. A text from an unknown number, though she recognized the communication style immediately. "Roof access, midnight, we need to talk." The Kane Industries building had a rooftop garden that few employees knew about, accessible only by executive keycard. Ava had heard whispers about it from administrative assistants who'd caught glimpses through the right windows of green oasis, 52 floors above the Seattle streets. where the most powerful people in the building went to think and make decisions that affected thousands of lives. At exactly midnight, she found Elijah there, standing at the edge of the space with the city spread out below him like a circuit board of lights. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, and Elliott Bay reflected the urban glow like scattered diamonds. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking more human than she'd seen him since that night at the retreat. The wind ruffled his dark hair, destroying its perfect styling, and for a moment Ava's breath caught at how beautiful he was when he wasn't performing the role of untouchable CEO. "You've been digging," he said without turning around, his voice carrying easily in the night air. "You've been manipulating," Ava replied, moving to stand beside him at the glass railing that offered a dizzying view of the streets below. "Have I?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but also something deeper resignation, maybe, or relief at finally being called out. "Or have I simply been ensuring that exceptional talent receives the recognition it deserves?" "Cut the corporate speak, Elijah." The use of his first name was deliberate, a refusal to let him hide behind professional formality. "I know what you've been doing. The projects, the resources, the timeline accommodations you've been engineering my success." Finally, he turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the city lights like mirrors. In the moonlight, she could see the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that suggested he was fighting for control. "And that bothers you?" "Of course it bothers me." The words exploded out of her, months of frustration and doubt finally finding their voice. "I've worked my ass off to get where I am, and now I have to wonder if any of it is real. Did I earn this promotion? Are my projects actually exceptional? Or am I just the billionaire's pet project?" Elijah's jaw tightened, and she saw a flash of something that might have been hurt cross his features. "You think I would compromise my company's interests for personal reasons?" "I think," Ava said, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, "that you're terrified of what you felt that night. So, you're trying to control the situation the only way you know how, by controlling me." "I'm not trying to control you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then what do you call this?" Ava gestured wildly, her professional composure finally cracking. "The behind-the-scenes maneuvering, the mysterious assignments, the way you watch me in meetings like you're making sure I don't stumble? You're treating me like I'm made of glass, instead of recognizing me as the professional I am." For a moment, they stood in tense silence, the city humming 52 floors below. Then Elijah's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. "You want to know why I've been watching you?" His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. "Because that night in the San Juans, for 3 hours, I felt something I haven't felt in 10 years. Something that terrifies me more than hostile takeovers or board coups or market crashes." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying what remained of its perfect styling. "I felt vulnerable. I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could see past the net worth and the reputation and the carefully constructed image to whatever's left of who I used to be." Ava felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice, at the glimpse of the man beneath the armor. "And then morning came," Elijah continued, his words barely audible above the wind. "And you couldn't look at me. You practically ran out of that hotel room, and I realized I'd made a mistake. I'd let someone in, and they couldn't wait to get away." "That's not," Ava started, but he held up a hand. "So yes, I've been watching you. Yes, I've been ensuring you have opportunities to succeed. Because if I can't have you, at least I can make sure you have everything else you deserve." The confession hung between them, raw and painful and achingly honest. Ava stared at him, seeing not the calculating CEO but the wounded man who'd held her that night like she was something precious and rare. "You never asked me why I ran," she said softly. Elijah's eyes sharpened, focusing on her with laser intensity. "Why?" "Because I was falling in love with you," Ava whispered, the words carried away by the wind even as they hung in the air between them. "Real, terrifying, life-changing love with a man who could buy and sell my entire existence without blinking. And that morning, when you were still asleep, I realized I was just another conquest to someone who could have anyone. You were never just another conquest, Elijah said fiercely, stepping closer until only inches separated them. Ava, you. Then prove it, she interrupted, her voice gaining strength from desperation and hope. Stop manipulating my career. Stop treating me like I'm fragile. If you want me, then want me as an equal, not as someone you need to protect or control. Elijah stared at her for a long moment, and Ava could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the battle between his ingrained need for control and his desire for something real, something that couldn't be managed or purchased or contained within the safe boundaries of corporate structure. What are you asking me to do? His voice was careful, measured, but she could hear the vulnerability underneath. I'm asking you to let me fail or succeed on my own merit, Ava said, reaching out to touch his hand where it gripped the railing. His skin was warm despite the cool night air, and she felt him tense at the contact. I'm asking you to trust that what we had that night was real, even if everything else is complicated. And I'm asking you to decide if you want Ava Mendez, the data analyst you can manipulate, or Ava Mendez, the woman who sees through your defenses and isn't afraid to call you on your fears. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of the city below distant sirens, the low hum of traffic, the life of a metropolitan area that never truly slept. But up here, 52 floors above it all, they existed in their own bubble of possibility and risk. I've never been in love before, Elijah said quietly, his admission barely audible above the ambient noise. I don't know how to do it without trying to control the outcome. The honesty in his voice broke something open in Ava's chest. This was the man she'd glimpsed that night, at the retreat, not the billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, but someone fundamentally lonely. Someone who'd built walls so high and strong that he'd forgotten how to let anyone inside. Then learn, she said, threading their fingers together. If you're willing to, we'll figure it out together. For the first time in months, Elijah smiled, not the practiced CEO smile that graced magazine covers, but something real and vulnerable and beautiful. It transformed his entire face, erasing years of careful control and revealing glimpses of the man he might have been if life had been kinder, if success hadn't required him to armor his heart. I've been seeing a therapist, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out like he couldn't quite believe he was saying them. Since that night, actually. Trying to figure out why I can't let anyone get close without trying to manage every aspect of the relationship. Ava's heart clenched at the vulnerability in his admission. What has he told you? She, Elijah corrected with a slight smile. Dr. Martinez. She says I use control as a defense mechanism. That I'm so afraid of being abandoned like my father was by investors, by partners, by life itself, that I try to engineer outcomes that feel safe. And what does that mean for us? Elijah was quiet for a moment, studying their joined hands. It means I need to learn to trust, not just in you, but in the idea that something real and good can exist without my constant management. Okay, she said, the single word carrying the weight of a promise. But Elijah, if we do this, if we try to make this work, I need you to understand something. I'm not good at being protected. I'm not good at having my successes questioned because of who I'm with. But with you, I want to try. I know, Elijah said, moving closer until she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt. I'm scared too. But Ava, what we have, it's worth the risk. As they stood on the rooftop with Seattle spreading out below them like a field of stars, Ava realized that sometimes love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it was about two damaged people choosing to trust each other with their fears and their hopes and their carefully guarded hearts. Sometimes it was about believing that together they could build something stronger than the walls they'd each constructed alone. 2 months passed like a carefully choreographed dance between secrecy and authenticity. Ava and Elijah had learned to navigate their impossible situation with the precision of dancers performing a complex routine professional distance during work hours, stolen moments of intimacy when the corporate world couldn't intrude. Their relationship flourished in the spaces between their professional lives. Weekend mornings in Elijah's penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, where he made coffee exactly the way she liked it, and listened to her talk about revolutionizing predictive analytics. Quiet dinners at her Capitol Hill apartment, where the billionaire CEO became simply Eli, the man who helped her assemble IKEA furniture and argued passionately about the superiority of pineapple on pizza. At work, they maintained their carefully constructed boundaries. No lingering glances during meetings. No personal conversations in hallways. No special treatment that couldn't be justified by business needs, or so they thought. But love, Ava discovered, had a way of making itself known despite the most careful precautions. She noticed it first in the way conversations stopped when she entered break rooms. The slightly too bright smiles from people who used to barely acknowledge her existence. The sideways glances during executive meetings where she presented her team's findings with increasing confidence and skill. "Ava," said Jamie during their usual coffee break, her voice carrying an undertone that made Ava's stomach clench with anxiety. "Can I ask you something?" They were sitting in the small cafe on the building's third floor, surrounded by the low hum of corporate conversations and the clink of ceramic mugs. Jamie's expression was troubled, and she kept glancing around nervously. "Of course," Ava replied, though every instinct warned her that she wouldn't like whatever was coming. "People are talking," Jamie said quietly, leaning across the small table. "About you and, well, about how quickly you've advanced, about who might be responsible for your success." The words hit Ava like ice water, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "What kind of talking?" "The kind that suggests your rapid promotion might have been influenced by factors beyond your professional qualifications." Jamie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I don't believe it, obviously. I've seen your work. But Ava, the rumors are getting more specific, more focused." "What do you mean by more focused?" Jamie glanced around again, then leaned even closer. "Derek Morrison has been telling anyone who'll listen that he has proof of an inappropriate relationship between you and someone in executive management. He's been asking questions about your attendance at company retreats, about executive floor visits, about your access to high-level projects." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. Derek Morrison, the Harvard MBA who'd applied for the position she'd been offered, the man who'd made no secret of his belief that her promotion was undeserved. "Proof?" she managed to ask. "I don't know the details," Jamie said quickly, "but Ava, he seems pretty confident, and he's been talking to people in HR." That afternoon, the rumors crystallized into something far more dangerous than office gossip. Ava was reviewing quarterly projections when her computer chimed with an email that made her blood run cold. The subject line read, "Internal investigation, conflict of interest allegations." Her hands trembled as she opened the message from Kane Industries' Ethics and Compliance Department. "Ms. Mendez, this office has received allegations suggesting that your recent promotions and project assignments may have been influenced by personal relationships with senior executives. Per company policy, we are required to conduct a thorough investigation into these claims. Specifically, we have received photographic evidence suggesting an inappropriate relationship that may constitute a conflict of interest under company policy. You are required to appear for an interview with the Ethics Committee on Friday, March 20th at 2:00 p.m. Please bring all documentation related to your career advancement at Kane Industries. This investigation is confidential and should not be discussed with colleagues or supervisors. Sincerely, Robert Chen, Director of Ethics and Compliance." Ava read the email 3 times, each reading making the situation feel more surreal and terrifying. Photographic evidence. Someone had taken pictures of her and Elijah together. Someone had been watching them, documenting their relationship, preparing to use it as a weapon. Her phone buzzed immediately. A text from Elijah, "Don't panic. Need to talk. Tonight." But panic was exactly what Ava felt, as whispers seemed to follow her through the halls for the rest of the day. Colleagues who'd congratulated her on her success now avoided eye contact. She caught Derek Morrison smirking at her during a department meeting, his expression smug with anticipated victory. Her phone rang as she was packing up her desk. Camille's name flashed on the screen, and Ava realized she hadn't returned her best friend's calls in weeks. "Finally," Camille's voice was sharp with worry and irritation. "I was about to call the Seattle police to do a wellness check. What the hell is going on with you?" "Cam, Ava's voice cracked, and suddenly the weight of carrying this secret alone felt unbearable. "I'm in trouble. Big trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Ava glanced around the nearly empty office, then made a decision. "The kind where I might lose my job, my career, and my reputation all in one spectacular explosion." "Meet me at Pike Place Market in an hour," Camille said immediately. "And Ava, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." That evening, as they sat in a quiet corner of a wine bar overlooking Elliott Bay, Ava finally told someone the truth. About the retreat, about the accidental email, about falling in love with a man who could destroy her with a word. Camille listened without judgment, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. "So let me get this straight," Camille said when Ava finished. "You're in love with your billionaire CEO. Someone has photos of you together, and there's an ethics investigation that could destroy your career." "That's the summary." "Yes." "And you've been carrying this alone for months because?" "Because it sounds insane when I say it out loud," Ava said, taking a large gulp of wine. "Because I was afraid. You'd think I was an idiot for getting involved with my boss. Because I didn't know how to explain falling for someone who lives in a completely different world." "Ava," Camille said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand, "I've been your best friend for 10 years. I've watched you date guys who were intimidated by your intelligence and ambition. If you found someone who challenges you intellectually and makes you happy, I don't care if he's a billionaire or a barista." Tears blurred Ava's vision. "What if this destroys everything I've worked for?" "Then you rebuild," Camille said fiercely. "But Ava, maybe it's time to stop running from what you want. Maybe it's time to fight for it." 3 days later, the whispers became weapons. Ava walked into the break room to find a cluster of colleagues huddled around someone's phone, their conversation dying the moment they saw her. The silence that followed was worse than any accusation, thick with judgment and speculation. "Ava!" called Jessica Waters from marketing, her voice pitched with artificial brightness. "How are you holding up with all the excitement around here?" "I'm fine," Ava replied carefully, moving toward the coffee machine with as much dignity as she could muster. "What excitement?" "Oh, Jessica's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Just all the rumors flying around. I'm sure it's nothing." "What rumors?" Ava asked, though she dreaded the answer. Tom Bradley from IT stepped forward, his expression openly hostile. "People are saying you're sleeping with someone upstairs, that your whole career trajectory has been, let's say, personally motivated." The words hit Ava like a physical blow, but she kept her voice steady. "People say a lot of things, Tom. Doesn't make them true." "Come on, Ava," Tom continued, emboldened by his audience. "Senior manager in under 2 years? The best projects? Executive-level access? Either you're the most gifted analyst in Seattle, or you're very good at other kinds of performance reviews." The implication was crude and unmistakable. Heat flooded Ava's face, and she could feel her hands beginning to shake. But she set down her coffee cup with deliberate calm, aware that everyone in the break room was watching this moment unfold like spectators at a gladiator match. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice carrying more authority than she felt, "I've worked 60-hour weeks for the past year. I've brought in 3 major clients and saved this company millions of dollars through my analysis. My team consistently delivers results that exceed expectations. If you think my success is based on anything other than professional competence, then maybe you should examine why that's easier for you to believe than the possibility that a woman might actually be exceptional at her job. Easy to say. Derek Morrison's voice cut through the tension as he entered the break room. Harder to prove when there's photographic evidence suggesting otherwise. The room fell deadly silent. Derek held up his phone, and Ava caught a glimpse of a photograph that made her stomach drop. Her and Elijah on the rooftop garden, standing close together, her hand on his arm. Interesting perspective on professional development, Derek continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. I'm sure the ethics committee will find it illuminating. The humiliation burned in Ava's chest like acid, eating away at the confidence she'd fought so hard to build. Every presentation she'd given, every insight she'd provided, every success she'd achieved, all of it now tainted by suspicion and reduced to crude speculation about her personal life. Derek, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head, I hope you feel better about yourself now. I hope destroying someone else's reputation makes you feel more competent, more deserving, more valuable. Because that's all this is, your inability to accept that someone might actually be better at the job than you are. She walked out with her head held high, leaving behind a room full of people who would undoubtedly dissect every word of the exchange. But the damage was done. The photograph was out there, the investigation was real, and her carefully constructed professional life was crumbling around her. That evening, Elijah was waiting for her on the rooftop, his expression grim. I saw the photo, he said as she approached. So did half the company, apparently. Derek Morrison will be terminated tomorrow morning. Ava spun around, her eyes flashing with anger. No, don't you see? That will just prove everything they're saying about us. That you'll destroy anyone who threatens me, that I'm under your protection. Ava, promise me, she said fiercely. Promise me you won't retaliate against Derek or anyone else. Promise me you'll let me handle this on my own terms. Elijah looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, Ava admitted. But Elijah, if we're going to have any chance at a real relationship, I need to prove that I can stand on my own, even if it means falling first. There might be another way, Elijah said quietly, his words careful and measured. A way for you to prove your worth beyond any doubt. I'm listening. Meridian Analytics is launching a new division focused on predictive market modeling, he continued. They're looking for a director-level hire to build the team from scratch. It's exactly the kind of opportunity you've been talking about, a chance to run your own show, implement your methodologies, prove what you can do without anyone questioning your path to success. The idea hit Ava like lightning, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Are you suggesting I leave Kane Industries? I'm suggesting, Elijah said carefully, that maybe the best way for us to be together is to not work together, at least not directly. Ava felt her heart racing as the implications sank in. Leaving Kane Industries meant abandoning the security she'd fought so hard to achieve. It meant starting over at a new company, with new colleagues who didn't know her history or question her qualifications. But it also meant freedom from the whispers, from the investigation, from the impossible position of loving a man who controlled her professional fate. What about us? She asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. What about us? Elijah echoed, turning to face her fully. Ava, if you're not my employee, if you're running your own department at a different company, then what we have is just what it's always been: people who fell for each other despite the complications. And you'd be okay with that? With me working for a competitor? Elijah smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his eyes. Ava, I've watched you work for 8 months. If anyone's going to revolutionize the analytics industry, I'd rather it be the woman I'm in love with than some stranger. The words hit her like a thunderbolt. You love me? "I've been in love with you since that night at the retreat," Elijah said softly, his voice carrying the weight of months of suppressed emotion. "Maybe even before that, when I watched you present the Harrison analysis and realized you saw patterns that no one else had noticed. I was just too afraid to admit it, too afraid of what it might mean for both of our carefully controlled lives." Ava felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally hearing the words she'd been afraid to hope for. "I love you too," she whispered. "That's what makes this so hard." "Then let's make it easier," Elijah said, reaching for her hand and intertwining their fingers. "Take the interview, see what they offer. And Ava, whatever you decide, I'll support you. Even if it means waiting until you're ready to believe that our love isn't a liability. It's the best thing that's ever happened to both of us." Ava looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the city that had become the backdrop for the most complicated and beautiful chapter of her life. The decision felt monumental, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to either retreat to safety or leap into the unknown. But as she sat there with Elijah's hand warm in hers, she realized that the biggest risk wasn't leaving Kane Industries or starting over at a new company. The biggest risk was letting fear convince her that love and professional success couldn't coexist, that she had to choose between the career she'd built and the man who'd become her heart. "Okay," she said finally, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'll take the interview. But Elijah, if I do this, if I leave Kane Industries, it has to be because I want the opportunity, not because I'm running away from us." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he replied. "And there's something else," Ava continued, her voice gaining conviction. "I'm tired of hiding. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, then I want to be able to tell people about us. Not the whole sordid story, but the truth that I'm with someone who makes me want to be better, who challenges me, who sees me as an equal." Elijah's smile was radiant. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of scrutiny?" "I'm ready for honesty," Ava said firmly. "I'm ready to stop being ashamed of falling in love with an extraordinary man just because he happens to be successful." As they sat together on the rooftop, the investigation and the gossip and the corporate politics felt like problems that belonged to other people. Here, 52 floors above the complications of their professional lives, they were just Ava and Elijah, two people who'd chosen love despite the odds, despite the obstacles, despite the voices that said it was impossible. My family, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss other lovely stories I have for you. Now you've done that, let's continue. 1 month later, Ava stood in her new office at Meridian Analytics, 20 floors below Kane Industries, with a view of Elliott Bay that rivaled any executive suite she'd ever seen. The nameplate on her door read Director of Predictive Analytics in elegant gold lettering, and the title still made her heart race with pride and disbelief. The interview process had been the most challenging and exhilarating experience of her professional life. 3 rounds of technical assessments that pushed her to demonstrate not just her analytical skills, but her ability to innovate and lead. Case studies that required her to solve complex problems in real time, presenting solutions to a panel of executives who asked probing questions about methodology and implementation. Her first project presentation had been a disaster. Her models had failed spectacularly when applied to real market data, leaving her standing in front of Meridian's board feeling like a fraud. But instead of making excuses or deflecting blame, she'd analyzed her failures with the same rigor she applied to successes, identified the flaws in her approach, and presented revised methodologies that exceeded everyone's expectations. Your ability to learn from failure and adapt quickly is exactly what we need, Patricia Williams, Meridian CEO, had said during their final meeting. We want you to build something extraordinary here, and we're prepared to give you everything you need to make that happen. The salary was 30% higher than her Kane Industries paycheck. The benefits package included equity in the company. Most importantly, She had complete freedom to hire her own team, develop her own methodologies, and prove that her vision for the future of data analytics could change how businesses understood their markets. Every morning for the past month, Ava had walked into her office knowing that she was there because of her skills, her innovation, her ability to see patterns that others missed. No one questioned her qualifications or whispered about her personal life. She was simply Ava Mendez, the brilliant director who was building something unprecedented in the analytics industry. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "How's the empire building going, Your Majesty?" She typed back, "Smaller kingdom than yours, but completely mine. Dinner tonight?" "My place. I'm actually cooking this time." "You mean you're ordering from that Italian place and heating it up yourself?" "I mean I'm making pasta from scratch, real pasta, with actual flour and eggs." Ava laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Their relationship had transformed once the professional complications were removed. Without the weight of corporate hierarchy between them, they could simply be themselves, vesicles in love, partners in life, two people, building something beautiful together. That evening, Ava arrived at Elijah's penthouse to find him in the kitchen, actually cooking. He wore jeans and a simple navy sweater, his hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, and he looked utterly concentrated as he rolled fresh pasta dough on the marble countertop. "You're really cooking," she said, dropping her bag by the door and moving to kiss him hello. "I'm really cooking," he confirmed, his smile proud and slightly surprised. "Linguine with clam sauce. From scratch." "From actual scratch?" "Well, the clams came from Pike Place Market, but I shucked them myself. That counts as scratch, right?" Ava wrapped her arms around his waist, breathing in the scent of garlic and wine and something indefinably him. This was what she loved most about their relationship now. The easy domesticity, the way Elijah could transform from the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms to the man who got genuinely excited about successfully making dinner. Over wine and surprisingly delicious pasta, they talked about their days. Ava shared her excitement about a breakthrough her team had made in consumer behavior prediction, while Elijah told her about a challenging acquisition negotiation that had finally reached resolution. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other, challenging each other's thinking, celebrating successes, and working through problems together. "I have something for you," Elijah said as they finished eating. "It's not my birthday," Ava protested. "It's better than a birthday. It's the 1-month anniversary of you becoming the youngest director in Meridian Analytics history." He handed her a small wrapped box, and despite herself, Ava's heart skipped. The size and weight suggested jewelry, and she felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Inside was a delicate necklace with a pendant that made her breath catch, a small data visualization rendered in tiny diamonds, showing an elegant curve that rose steadily from left to right. "Elijah, it's beautiful, but—" "Look closer," he said softly. Ava examined the pendant more carefully and realized what she was seeing. The diamond pattern wasn't a generic data visualization. It was her career trajectory, rendered in precious stones. Her salary increases, her professional milestones, her advancement from junior analyst to director, all mapped out in a tiny work of art that captured her journey with mathematical precision. "This is my career," she whispered. "This is your success," Elijah corrected gently. "Every data point earned through your talent, your innovation, your relentless pursuit of excellence. No one can take that away from you, Ava. Not office gossips, not ethics investigations, not anyone who tries to diminish what you've accomplished." Tears blurred her vision as Elijah fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers gentle against her skin. The pendant settled just above her heart, a tangible reminder of everything she'd achieved through her own merit and determination. "I love it," she said, turning in his arms. "I love you." "I love you too," he replied, his hands settling on her shoulders. "And Ava, I need you to know something. Whether you're working for me, working for a competitor, or decide to start your own company tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Not proud of you as my girlfriend, but proud of you as the exceptional woman you are. Even when my first project at Meridian crashed and burned? Especially then, Elijah said firmly, because you didn't make excuses or blame external factors. You analyzed your mistakes, learned from them, and came back stronger. That's not something that can be taught or engineered from above. That's pure Eva Mendez brilliance. 6 months later, Eva discovered that success tasted like champagne and vindication, with notes of pure joy and hard-earned confidence. She stood at the podium in the Four Seasons Ballroom, holding the Pacific Northwest Business Journal's Rising Star Award, looking out at an audience of Seattle's business elite. Her team at Meridian had just landed their biggest client yet, a Fortune 500 company that had chosen them over 3 larger, more established competitors based solely on Eva's revolutionary predictive modeling methodology. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces from Kane Industries. Some looked genuinely proud of her achievement. Others, including Derek Morrison, whose termination had come not from Elijah's retaliation, but from his own attempt to sell proprietary information to competitors, watched with barely concealed resentment. "This award isn't just mine," Eva said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the elegant ballroom. "It belongs to every professional who's been told their success was due to luck rather than skill. Every woman who's had to prove their worth twice as hard because of assumptions about their background or their relationships." She found Elijah in the audience, sitting at a table with other tech executives, his eyes bright with pride and unconditional love. He was wearing the charcoal suit she'd helped him pick out, and his smile was radiant with genuine happiness for her achievement. "6 months ago, I faced a choice," Eva continued, her confidence growing with each word. "I could let other people's assumptions define my worth, or I could prove them wrong. I could hide from challenges, or I could embrace them. Success isn't about who you know or who you're dating. It's about the problems you solve, the value you create, and the courage to stand by your achievements even when others try to diminish them." The applause was thunderous, a wave of recognition that washed over her like warmth. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately surrounded by colleagues, competitors, and potential clients, all eager to congratulate her and discuss possible collaborations. "Eva," called Dr. Janet Kim, the CEO of a major consulting firm, "your presentation on consumer behavior prediction was groundbreaking. We'd love to explore a partnership." "Ms. Mendez," said Robert Thompson from a Fortune 100 company, "your methodology could revolutionize how we approach market forecasting. When can we schedule a meeting?" For an hour, Eva moved through the crowd, fielding compliments and business propositions, her diamond necklace catching the ballroom lights like a constellation of achievements. This was what professional success felt like when it was built on merit rather than speculation, solid, unshakable, entirely her own. But the most meaningful moment came when Patricia Williams approached with someone Eva hadn't expected to see. "Eva, I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Chen, the former Chief Data Officer at Kane Industries." Patricia said with a knowing smile, "She's actually the one who recommended you for this position." Dr. Chen, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, extended her hand. "I've been following your work for over a year, Ms. Mendez. Your analysis on consumer behavior patterns was brilliant, completely independent thinking that impressed everyone in the C-suite." "Thank you," Eva said, still processing this revelation. "But I thought the position at Meridian was. I mean, how did you know about my work?" "Because exceptional talent doesn't go unnoticed," Dr. Chen replied. "I may have left Kane Industries, but I still have friends there who recognize innovation when they see it. Your promotion to senior manager was overdue, if anything. And when Patricia told me about this new division, I immediately thought of you." As Dr. Chen walked away, Eva felt something settle into place, a final piece of validation that her success truly was her own. Even her opportunity at Meridian had come through professional recognition, not romantic manipulation. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Elijah appeared at her side. "Congratulations, Ms. Mendez," he said formally, offering her his arm with theatrical gallantry. "May I escort the rising star to the after-party?" "You may," Ava replied with a grin, "but I warn you I'm feeling pretty confident tonight. I might do something scandalous like dance with you in public." "The scandal," Elijah said, leaning close enough that only she could hear, "would be if I let anyone else dance with the most successful woman in Seattle." As they moved onto the dance floor, Ava marveled at how far they'd come from that terrifying night when she'd accidentally sent her confession to the wrong person. No more stolen glances across conference tables. No more carefully maintained professional distance. No more hiding their love like it was something shameful. They were simply two people in love, building their careers with equal passion and supporting each other's dreams with unwavering dedication. "Any regrets?" Elijah asked as they swayed to the music, his voice warm against her ear. "About what?" "About that accidental email. About turning your life upside down for love. About taking the biggest risk of your professional career." Ava considered the question seriously, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, she'd been a mid-level analyst drowning in self-doubt, afraid to take risks, convinced she didn't deserve the opportunities that came her way. Tonight, she was an award-winning director, running her own team, in love with a man who challenged and supported her in equal measure, living a life she'd barely dared to dream possible. "No regrets," she said firmly, pulling back to meet his eyes. "Best mistake I ever made. Even though it nearly gave us both heart attacks?" Ava laughed, remembering the horror of realizing she'd sent her most vulnerable thoughts to her CEO, the terror of walking into his office that first night, the months of complicated navigation between love and professional ambition. "Especially because it nearly gave us both heart attacks," she said, "because it forced us to be honest about what we really wanted, what we were really afraid of, and what we were willing to fight for." As they danced in the ballroom surrounded by Seattle's business community, Ava understood that the best love stories weren't about perfection or easy paths to happiness. They were about two people who chose to grow together, to challenge each other, to build something stronger than either could create alone. They were about believing that love and success didn't have to be mutually exclusive, that the right person would celebrate your achievements rather than diminish them, and that sometimes the most terrifying mistakes led to the most beautiful beginnings. "So what's next?" Elijah asked as the song ended. "Next," Ava said, her voice full of hope and determination, "we keep building together." But as they prepared to leave the ballroom hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities awaited them, Ava caught sight of a familiar figure in the crowd. Derek Morrison stood near the bar, his expression dark with resentment as he watched their obvious happiness. For a moment, their eyes met across the room, and Ava saw something that made her blood run cold, not just anger or jealousy, but calculation, the look of someone who wasn't finished fighting. She squeezed Elijah's hand tighter, a sudden chill running down her spine despite the warmth of the ballroom. "What is it?" Elijah asked, following her gaze. "Probably nothing," Ava said, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Derek's presence at this event wasn't coincidental, just ghosts from the past. As they left the ballroom, Ava tried to push the encounter from her mind. She had everything she'd ever wanted: a career built on her own merit, a man who loved her as an equal, and a future full of possibilities. But success, she was learning, sometimes painted targets on your back, and some people never forgave you for proving them wrong. The Seattle Business Journal lay open on Ava's desk, its headline reading, "Power Couple." Meridian Analytics Director and Kane Industries CEO announce joint venture. The accompanying photo showed her and Elijah at the press conference where they'd announced their new foundation and initiative to provide data, analytics, training, and mentorship to underrepresented communities in tech. Ava smiled as she read the article, which focused entirely on their professional achievements and philanthropic goals. No mention of office gossip or inappropriate relationships, just two successful executives using their resources to create opportunities for others. Her phone buzzed with a text from Camille. "Saw the article. So proud of you. Also, when's the wedding? I need advance notice for maid of honor duties." Ava laughed, typing back, "One milestone at a time. But Cam, thank you for telling me to stop running from what I wanted. That's what best friends are for. Now get back to being a power couple." As evening approached, Ava gathered her things and headed for the elevator. She had dinner plans with Elijah, a quiet night at home where they'd review foundation applications and argue about the best candidates for their scholarship program. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic. It was better than that. It was real, built on equal partnership and mutual respect, strengthened by the challenges they'd overcome together. The elevator doors opened to reveal Derek Morrison, impeccably dressed and wearing the kind of smile that had once intimidated her. But now, Ava saw him for what he was, a man who'd never learned that tearing others down didn't build you up. "Ava," he said pleasantly as she stepped into the elevator. "Congratulations on the foundation announcement. Very public relations savvy." "Thank you, Derek," she replied calmly, pressing the button for the lobby. "I hope you know what you're doing," he continued, his tone conversational but with an undertone that made her skin crawl. "Seattle's business community has a long memory. People don't forget when someone's success story doesn't quite add up." The elevator dinged at the lobby level, and Ava stepped out without looking back. "Derek," she said over her shoulder, "some people spend so much time looking backward that they never see what's right in front of them. I hope you figure out how to move forward someday." As she walked through the lobby toward the exit, Ava felt a sense of completion. She'd built something extraordinary, not just a career, but a life where love and ambition coexisted, where challenges became stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. "How did it go with the Morrison encounter?" "Like water off a duck's back. See you at home." "Home, I like the sound of that." Outside, Seattle hummed with its usual energy, the city that had become the backdrop for her transformation from insecure analyst to confident director, from someone afraid of her own feelings to a woman brave enough to fight for love. As Ava walked toward the future she'd built with her own hands and her own heart, she realized that the best stories weren't about perfect people making perfect choices. They were about real people making brave choices, learning from their mistakes, and discovering that the most beautiful victories were the ones you earned together. Behind her, the lights of both Kane Industries and Meridian Analytics glowed against the Seattle Skyline 2 towers, representing not competing loyalties, but complementary strengths. Like her and Elijah, they were separate entities that created something more powerful when they worked in harmony. And somewhere in the city, her phone was probably buzzing with another text from Camille, another project update from her team, another opportunity to build something extraordinary. The future was vast and full of possibilities, and Ava Mendez was ready for all of it. My family, Ava and Elijah's story, reminds us that love isn't about perfection. It's about two people choosing to grow together, to challenge each other, and to build something stronger than either could create alone. Sometimes, our most embarrassing moments lead to our greatest blessings. And sometimes, the courage to be vulnerable with the wrong person at the wrong time turns out to be exactly the right choice. What do you think happened next for Ava and Elijah? Drop your theories in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more emotional journeys that prove love is always worth fighting for.